Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Once again, good afternoon, everyone, for those of you joining us, or good morning if you're in the West Coast. My name is Jose Miranda, and I'm ACCT's Director of Government Relations, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Rosario Duran, who's our Senior Government Relations Associate. Welcome to our latest Action in Washington Live, August edition. We're going to go over an update of what we have seen in Washington, be it in Congress or from the Department of Education and the White House over the past couple of months, and see how those actions and those activities may impact community colleges. Before that, a couple of housekeeping items. One, we are recording this webinar, and we will be posting the recording as well as the slide deck on our website, probably at some point next week once we have it processed and available. So if you know any colleagues who are planning on joining, who were unable to join, or if you'd like to share it with any peers, you'll be able to do it from our website. Two, we go throughout the presentation, please feel free to ask questions. There is a Q&A button either in the top or bottom bar of your screen. Go ahead and use that button to ask any questions. We will get to the questions at the end of the presentation throughout the Q&A. Our hope is that we'll be able to answer some of your questions throughout the presentation with the materials we have prepared, but anything else that may come up, please feel free to ask and we'll do our best to answer. With that, we'll go ahead and get started, and we'll share with you the agenda of what you can expect from this webinar. First, we're going to talk about, as I said, some of the congressional activity that we've seen over the past couple of months. That includes the CHIPS Plus, or Chips and Science Act of 2022 that was just signed into law this week. We're going to talk about a proposal from House Republicans that may have implication for community colleges called the Real Reforms Act. We're going to talk about the reconciliation legislation that came up last minute as an agreement from Senator Schumer and Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia in the Inflation Reduction Act. We'll have a bit of a discussion around the appropriations process and where we are at on the FY23 cycle. We'll also talk about the Department of Education activity in terms of grants updates, grants available, as well as grants that have been disseminated, as well as regulatory updates, something which has been the department has been very active on this past summer. And we'll close out with a call to action for you all, as well as some upcoming events. So to start us off, I'll share a little bit of context on CHIPS and Science Act. You have probably heard over the past 2 months that Congress was very busy negotiating and working on a conference committee, trying to find an agreement on a legislation that would prop up U.S. global competitiveness in manufacturing, trade, and many other things. At the crux of these negotiations and what made up the conference committee were 2 pieces of legislation that were passed by either chamber. The first was the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, which passed the Senate last year. And then the next one was the America Competes Act, which passed the House earlier this year. The bills at the core focus on very similar things, and that is uplifting our domestic manufacturing production for microchips and other microelectronics that are needed, as well as ensuring that the U.S. remains competitive in trade and competition globally. But what's one thing to consider, and particularly for community colleges, is that the American Competes Act was a bit of a more comprehensive legislation and included a lot of different factors that USEC got left out. Among those was a provision to extend Pell Grant eligibility to shorter-term workforce training programs that would be as short as 300 clock hours, 150 clock hours, and to be given in as little as 8 weeks. There were other provisions that were included in America Competes that would have been beneficial to community colleges, which is the inclusion of the College Transparency Act, the reauthorization of the Registered Apprenticeships Act, as well as the reauthorization of TACT funding, among other things. Unfortunately, with the way the summer developed and with the negotiations taking longer and longer as it went through, the Senate leadership decided to take a different approach. And though we were it's our understanding that we're still in good footing. Over the past 2 months, we have been working closely with staff on both sides of the aisle and on both chambers, committee staff, to ensure that the language that was included in the America Competes Act would be a viable option to make it into the final negotiation table for the conference committee. We provided technical assistance, we provided feedback, we continued those lines of communication. But ultimately, it came down not to the language of the bill, but it came down to just the scope of what was going to pass both chambers. And so USICA and Competes became the Chips and Science Act of 2022. This was as a result of the negotiations stretching on and the reality that if Congress did not do something before they went on break for the August recess, the odds of it happening were very, very, very slim. When Congress comes back, they have a full plate of things that they have to accomplish before the end of the year. And this was just not going to happen if it continued stretching on. And so Leader Schumer made a call and decided that they were going to move only the things that they knew they had brought bipartisan support on. And so that's how we came with the Chips and Science Act, which passed the Senate July 27th. It passed the House on July 26th, then 28th. And then President Biden just signed it into law this past Tuesday, August 9th. What we heard from committee staff was that the remaining provisions that were part of the conference committee could be considered and would still be negotiated and could potentially be brought together in a second legislative package that would be bipartisan. However, the odds of that, considering everything else that that Congress has to take care of, are very slim. But we'll keep an eye out to see what the prospects of short-term Pell passing by the end of the year through that are. Now, in terms of what CHIPS Act does, while it doesn't have short-term Pell and it doesn't have CTA or the various other components that I mentioned, it's not all bad news for community colleges. There are several provisions that mention it. I actually did a search on the text of the bill, and community colleges come up at least 32 times. A big emphasis of the bill is, of course, not only ensuring that as a country, we're providing industries the incentives to produce items domestically, but also that we have the workforce that needed for us to remain competitive. And so the bill directs the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, the Department of Energy, and the National Science Foundation to do outreach on STEM-related careers and as well as STEM-related pipelines. And part of this outreach includes targeting community colleges so that they can reach the kind of population that is underrepresented on STEM careers, as well as underserved populations. Another key item that was part of the bill was updates to NSF's Advanced Technological Education Program. This is a program that is designed specifically for community colleges to help build that pipeline to STEM careers. So that's another key item that's on the bill. And then in addition to that, scattered throughout the bill, there's a couple of different programs that are established, whether competitive grants or partnership opportunities for industries, where they're highly encouraged to partner with institutions of higher education and with community colleges specifically, so they can, as I said, reach those populations that are not reaching, as well as help them build those pipelines and make sure that they have the workforce that is needed, that is trained with the proper skills that will be needed to fill the jobs that the bill in theory will produce domestically. There's also at least 2 new scholarship opportunities that are inclusive of undergraduate students at community colleges with focus on technology areas. If you'd like to get a more in-depth look at what the bill does, we put together a fact sheet with all the relevant sections where community colleges are either directly impacted or would be one of the several entities that are eligible for partnership or for additional funding. Once we post this, the fact sheet can be found right now already on our website at acct.org under the advocacy page. But once we post the slide deck and the recording of the webinar, we'll make sure that it's linked as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rosario.
Thank you, Jose. So I'm going to be talking a bit about the Real Reforms Act. This bill was introduced by Ranking Member Fox, Rep. Stefanik, and Rep. Banks just last week. And the acronym stands for Responsible Education Assistance Through Loan Reform Act. That's a bit about it. It does include, I know Jose just kind of touched on how short-term Pell was not included in CHIPS Plus, and that was one of our main legislative priorities. However, it is a key provision in this bill, and it part of the provision would prohibit tuition and fees of the programs to exceed the earning boost students could potentially receive from their credentials. So that is something to keep in mind. However, most of the bill is focused on significant student loan reform, including mandatory minimum payments on income-based repayment plans, the elimination of lifetime forgiveness, and it would prohibit the Department of Education to make any additional loan forgiveness beyond what's already stated in law without congressional approval. It also would eliminate PSLF, and it would ban interest capitalization. So we don't expect this bill to necessarily pass under the 117th Congress. However, keeping in mind the House possibly flipping in November, it is really insightful to see what type of bills Republican leadership would be introducing, or specifically because Ranking Member Fox is anticipated to be the chair next year. So definitely keeping that in mind. And also it is encouraging to see that short-term Pell would be a priority, would continue to be a priority. So that is Real Reforms Act. I'll also now touch on the Inflation Reduction Act. So as Jose also mentioned, Senator Schumer and Senator Manchin struck a surprising reconciliation deal, and it includes Medicare drug price negotiation, tax reform, investments in clean energy. However, it's definitely very different than the initial reconciliation bill that included a lot of our top priorities. The bill passed the Senate over the weekend, and the House is expected to come back from their August recess this Friday to pass the bill. And although it doesn't include our major legislative priorities, it does include 3 grant opportunities that community colleges are eligible for. And these are all found in the climate investment section of the bill. So the first one is the Neighborhood Access and Equity Grant. This bill specifically touches on investments in transportation access in specifically underserved communities. So it supports neighborhood equity, safety, and affordable transportation access in reconnecting these communities. And it aims to mitigate negative impacts of transportation facilities and construction projects on these underserved communities, while also supporting equitable transportation planning and community engagement activities. And that is funded at $3 billion. Then we have the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grants. These are investments in community-led projects in disadvantaged communities and community capacity building centers. And it aims to address disproportionate environmental and public health harms related to pollution and climate change in these communities. That is also funded at $3 billion. And then we have the Alternative Fuel and Low Emissions Aviation Tech Program, which would support the purchase and installation of zero emissions equipment and technology at ports. And that is also $3 billion. So these are 3 major grants with a lot of funding that could definitely help community colleges and their communities. And with that, I will turn it over to Jose.
Thank you, Rosario. We're going to pivot now to the appropriation cycle. And before I start talking, just to give you a quick recap of what we should be expecting or how things are supposed to work. We're currently operating on fiscal year 2022. Fiscal year 2022 ends on September 30th of this year. Congress is supposed to take action before September 30th, before that deadline, in order to continue the government funded and operated at full capacity. If Congress does not take action, we could see either a full or a partial government shutdown, which we have seen happen over the past 5 years, particularly in the last administration. We saw it happen a couple of times. More often than not, that September 30th deadline is not met. Congress has a knack of procrastinating on appropriations or waiting until very long. And this isn't just this administration, it's the last administration, it's the administration before that. Congress has had to use what is called a continuing resolution to keep the government funded. and then so they can finish up their work on appropriations. A prime example was just past cycle, where the fiscal year 2022 appropriations did not become a law until March of this year, 6 months after the fiscal year had already started. So we're hoping that that's not the case this time around, but we are also not on track to pass all the bills that need to pass by September 30th. So with that in mind, the House moved all of 12 of their appropriations proposals out of committee by the end of June. And their intention was to move all 12 appropriation bills out into the floor for a vote and passing them in the House. However, that did not come to fruition. In fact, the House only moved 6 out of the 12 bills. The House only passed 6 out of the 12 bills. And of the 6 that are pending, that includes the Labor, Health and Human Services, Education and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill, which funds the Department of Education and the Department of Labor. On the Senate side, things are even slower or further back. The Senate Appropriations Committee has not marked up any of the bills. They haven't really moved any of the bills out of committee. What they ended up doing was Senate Democratic leadership on the Appropriations Committee unveiled their 12 proposals as the majority, as the party in the majority. They unveiled their 12 bills as a proposal and included an explanatory statement and summary of each bill. However, in the House, you can move a bill out of committee and you can even pass it entirely in a party line. Whatever parties in the majority can move the proposals as they want. In the Senate, that's not the case because of the 50-50 split in the Senate. All committees are essentially split evenly as well, which means you need Republican support to move any of the bills out of committee. And then, of course, to move them, to pass them in the Senate, you need at least 10 Republican votes. You need 60 votes in order to bypass a potential filibuster. And so I say this because the proposals in the Senate are entirely partisan as well. And that's why we haven't seen action on committee or on the floor for them. No Republican has supported any of the proposals. And in fact, the reason why they haven't marked up any of the bills is because we don't have a top line number yet. Unlike the past decade where Congress was restricted by the Budgetary Act in 2011, that already set forth the budgetary caps for each year, Congress has to now negotiate what their top line number is. And this is a bipartisan decision. Republicans have to be brought into the table for this because their votes are needed in the Senate. And there have been a lot of disagreements over the amount of budgetary expenses they want to do for fiscal year 2023. And on top of the financial number issue, there have been a lot of policy writers that have complicated negotiations, particularly in light of the Roe v. Wade decision from the Supreme Court that have made this agreement harder to reach. So what we call the four corners, the chairs and ranking members of the Appropriations Committee in the House and the Senate are still actively negotiating. We haven't seen any updates or any progress, but we do expect them to have some kind of action when they come back from the break in September. But that action will likely be a continuing resolution, which will extend government funding at FY22 levels past the September 30th deadline. We are likely expecting a CR to go through the end of this year so that Congress has enough time to negotiate a top line number and then each individual bill. Having said that, a couple of items, top line takeaways from the House and the Senate bills. Wait, no, I don't think this is my slide. Rosario, I'll let you take it.
Thank you, Jose. So some of the takeaways that we're seeing from the bills that have been released by the House and the Senate are the Senate is providing $83.4 billion in discretionary funding for the Department of Education, and that is an increase of $8.1 billion, so that overall 11% increase from fiscal year 22 funding levels. The House's bill provides $86.7 billion in discretionary funding for the department, and that's an increase of $11.3 billion and 15% overall increase from fiscal year 22. And so the difference between those two bills is it's a 4% difference, $3.3 billion. between the two proposals. Both of the bills do have a $500 increase in the maximum Pell Grant, which we know last year we had the highest ever one-time increase in Pell Grant of $400. So this would be now the biggest increase overall. And also the bill, both bills include a provision that would expand Pell Grant eligibility and other Title IV aid eligibility to DACA recipients and TPS recipients.
And we've compiled for you two tables with the list of federal programs that most directly impact community colleges. Just a couple of times, I won't go over the entire list here, but like I said, we're going to have this table available for you all after. Just a couple of things to highlight besides the Pell Grant increase that Rosario mentioned is an increase to the Strengthening Community College Training Grants. That is a program that is run through the Department of Labor, specifically for community colleges to either set up or uplift their current workforce training programs in partnership with local industry. This is I guess is not so relatively new program anymore. It's a program that was first funded in fiscal year 2020 and has steadily seen increases of about $5 million each year over the past 3 years. This time, the president, in his proposal, asked for the program to be doubled. The House met the president's request at $100 million. The Senate level funded the program, but although on paper that might not look like a good thing, it's actually a relatively good thing because the Senate over the past 2-3 years of the existence of the program has actually not funded it at all in their first iteration. And that is because this is a new program that was started in the House bill. It is the brainchild of Chairwoman DeLauro in the Appropriations Committee. And so each year over the past 3 years, the Senate and the House have put very different numbers. And once they came to the negotiating table, come up with a middle ground number. So the fact that the baseline now it's 50 as opposed to 0 is a really good thing. We're hoping we're going to continue advocating for the number to be as close as possible to 100 million. But we'll see. Again, it all depends on what the top line number will be and how negotiations turn out. A couple of other key items for community colleges is the relatively new basic need grants that's been funded for 2 years now. It was funded in FY21 and then at FY22. In FY21, it was funded at $5 million, I think. In FY22, it was funded at $8 million with a 25% set aside for community colleges specifically. For FY22, both the House and the Senate proposed to nearly double it to $15 million, which is great. A couple of other items is C Campus, which is would see if the number that both the president and both chambers have proposed stays the same, it would see a $30 million increase. And then, of course, the new post-secondary student success grants, which a similar predecessor is now live. And Rosario will talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But that was funded last year at $5 million. That would see a significant increase to, in both bills. Of course, the House has a much nicer number for us. This is a new program geared at ensuring that we get our students not only through the door, but also throughout our program completed and so that they can reap the benefits of post-secondary education. I'll turn it over to Rosario for the second chart.
Thank you, Jose. So here we'll go over some additional funding, and overall across the board we see huge increases for all MSIs, for all the minority serving institutions. I want to specifically highlight for our predominantly Black institutions, we see that increase by $5 million from 18 to 23, and that's meeting the president's requested amount in both the House and the Senate, as well as our TCUs, our tribally controlled colleges. We see that increase by $9 million from 44 to 53 million. And that again is meeting President Biden's requested amount. And the biggest increase overall is for Hispanic serving institutions. It's going to be going from 203 million to both the House and the Senate have gone either above or met the president at his 266 million request. And so roughly a $63 million increase which is really encouraging. We also have the Strengthening Institutions Program, SIP, that is also seeing a huge increase of about $65 million. The House and the Senate neither of them reached the president's request of $209 million, but they're both substantial. The only difference between the two is about $4 million on either side, but overall really great increases for these particular programs.
And I want to just put a pin on SIP specifically. We consider these numbers a huge victory, especially coming off of the FY22 results. In fiscal year 22, the Strengthening Institutions Program only saw a $1 million increase. And so for us to see upwards of 70 million proposed is a huge victory. It's something that as soon as the FY22 bill became law, we went to lawmakers and committee staff to express our disappointment. So we're glad to see that they're hearing and they're taking our feedback and acting on it. And then the last thing that I'll note on appropriations before we shift to grants is that these are only the Democratic version proposals, both in the House and the Senate. Like I said, we don't have a top line number and we don't have Republicans at the table with these two proposals yet. Once that top line number comes, typically when you have the appropriation cycle, you have the House proposal, you have the Senate proposal, they come together, they usually end up somewhere in between. That's not a guarantee this time around because Republicans might be asking might consider both of these numbers to be too high. And so our advocacy and your advocacy in particular will be critical to ensuring that these programs see the investments they need in FY23. With that, we'll turn over now to what is happening over at the Department of Education. And we'll start off with some funding that you should hopefully already be seeing if you were one of the recipients. But on the HERF funds, this is the last pot of money that was still available from the HERF fund that passed last year in the American Rescue Plan. And so last month, the Department of Education awarded that final round. It was about $198 million. And this last pot of funding was specifically for colleges or institutions that had the highest unmet needs from COVID expenses and COVID challenges. And so one thing to note is about 90% of the funds were awarded to HBCUs, TCUs, HSIs, MSIs, and community colleges and rural institutions. And then we actually went through the list. The department has already posted a breakdown on state by state, how much funding went through each state from this $198 million. And they've already posted the list of institutions that were awarded. We took a list of that institution and over 100 community colleges were recipients of this last pot of funding. So we're really excited to see that this money is already out, and we're gonna keep an eye out to see how it has been utilized. With that, I'll turn it over to Rosario for grant funding that's not currently out the door, but that it's available.
Yeah, so a couple grant reminders. The USDA does have a SNAP national partnership that's currently accepting applications. The deadline to apply to that is September 3rd. And that's approximately $3 million to nonprofit organizations with large networks of community colleges or a consortia of community colleges. However, they do need to have experience providing workforce development services to low income and low skilled individuals, including SNAP participants. Then the Department of Education has the newly created College Completion Fund for post-secondary student success, which Jose was alluding to earlier. And they're also currently accepting applications. The deadline to apply is October 12th. And the funding will support grants to HBUs, TCUs, and minority serving institutions, such as Hispanic serving institutions, many of which are community colleges, to invest in data-driven and evidence-based reforms that encourage post-secondary retention, transfer, and completion. The institutions are specifically invited to focus on supporting existing students who are close to graduation and re-engaging students who withdrew from school temporarily during the pandemic. And lastly, we have the Department of Labor. They have the third round of ACCT funding that is currently accepting applications, and the deadline to apply for that is on October 14th. And they'll be giving special consideration to applications submitted by HBCUs, TCUs, HSIs, and MSIs, and also SIP programs. And
And
now oh, go ahead, Jose.
just one quick thing to note on the college completion grant is that they just announced that today. So perfect opportunity for you all to jump on this if you are one of those eligible institutions that are eligible based on their defined pool of applicants. We're going to shift over now from a discussion from grants to another area where the department has been very, very active this summer, and that is on the regulatory side. But before we give you some updates from this past month, this summer, I'm going to give a little bit of context. So earlier this year and last year, the Department of Education engaged what is called a negotiated rulemaking for all Title IV programs, essentially. And what that meant is that they convened different committees to take a look at the regulations on various aspects under Title IV and come up with updated guidance and updated regulations. And the way that negotiated rulemaking works is that these convenings are supposed to have representatives from all areas that would be impacted. So that means institutions, student advocates, different kinds of institutions, consumer protection groups, you name it. And so from this negotiated rulemaking that took place last year and earlier this year, the way it works is if a committee reaches consensus on the language for a proposed rule, then the Department of Education has to take the language as is, and that's what they publish for a comment period in the process of finalizing the rule. If the committee does not reach consensus, and consensus means everybody has to agree, then the Department of Education can take their feedback, it can take their comments, but then they have the flexibility to write their own regulations to be posted through a proposed notice of proposed rulemaking. And so with that in mind, after the rulemaking process, negotiated rulemaking process, the committees were able to reach consensus on two areas, and that was on the ability to benefit, as well as the 90-10 rule that impacts proprietary institutions being able to access Title IV funds. They were not able to reach consensus on different areas, though, such as administrative capacity, gainful employment, financial responsibility, as well as many others. So with that in mind, after the negotiated rulemaking process ended, the Department of Education then took the task, getting the feedback and starting drafting their proposed rules. And so what that came out was the following. Over this past summer, they have announced several different rules that are currently open for a comment period, as well as they've announced several that will be delayed until next year. So I'll turn it over to Rosario now to share a little bit more on that.
Jose, yes. So as Jose kind of went over, some of the rules that we've seen, specifically gainful employment and the ability to benefit, those rules have been postponed until 2023. So we are definitely not going to be seeing any action on those throughout the rest of the year. However, we did see some action on the proposed rules for improving student loan relief programs, and the deadline for that to submit a comment for that is tomorrow, August 12th. So better late than never. The proposed regulations would alleviate student loan debt burdens for borrowers whose schools closed or lied to them, who are permanently disabled, and for public service workers who have met their commitments under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And it would also put an end to student loan capitalization wherever it is not required by statute. And then we have the proposed rule for Title IX, and the deadline to submit a public comment for that is September 12th. The proposed rule has several changes, some of which are to codify the protections for sexual orientation and gender identity. It removes the live hearing requirements for Title IX investigations and reverts the definition of sexual harassment to back to sex-based conduct that creates a hostile environment by denying or limiting a person's ability to participate in a school's educational program or activity. Additionally, it protects parenting and pregnant students and employees from discrimination, and it would require schools to provide reasonable modifications for students, reasonable break times for employees, and lactation spaces. Notably, also, they did say that they would not be, they would be writing a separate rule for athletes, for student athletes under the gender identity area. So will not see any of that with this specific rule. And I think Jose is going to close us out with some of the other rules that recently came out.
Thank you, Rosario. And so, yeah, those regulations or proposed regulations that Rosario talked about were some of the ones that the department published earlier in the summer. The ones that you're going to see here now are the more recent ones that they've published later in July. And so the two big ones that were published most recently were one around 9010, like I mentioned, the upgrade to the 9010 rule for proprietary institutions. But of interest to us, they've also published the second chance Pell regulations. As you recall, second chance Pell became the ban on incarcerated students accessing Pell grants was lifted in 2020, in December 2020, through the fiscal year appropriations law of that year. That was a ban that was in place since the 90s. And so this is but even though there was a ban in place, over the past 3 administrations, the department has been running a pilot program on second chance Pell, allowing now up to 200 institutions to have prison education programs where students were able to access Pell grants. With the lift of the ban in 2020 and with these regulations coming into place, every institution that meets the guidelines and the specific guardrails that the administration is putting together will be able to set up prison education programs and utilize Pell grants for those eligible recipients that are currently part of them. And so that rule is currently open and open for comments. The deadline for both rules, they're both separate, but they were posted on the same day. And so they both close on the same day. It's Friday, August 26th. If your institution has experience running a prison education program or would be interested in setting one up once the rule becomes enacted, highly encourage you to look into the rule and provide any feedback, whether that's positive feedback on things that you like that they're offering or any areas where you think you might suggest a change. One thing to note on these and the rules that Rosario mentioned and why it's critical to note that gainful employment and ATB have been delayed until next year is that in order for any of these rules to become active by July 1st of next year, so July 1st of 2023, they have to be published and finalized by November 1st of this year. So this is why you have these different comment period windows open and they close. And then once the comment period window closes, the Department of Education staff has to review every single comment and respond to them and use that feedback to finalize the rule and publish it. And so the department's goal is for all of these rules that are currently open for comments to be done and finalized by November 1st of this year. With that, I'll turn it over to Rosario to close us out with a call to action and a couple of other things.
Thank you, Jose. So with all that being said, you guys are probably wondering, okay, so what can we do now? And luckily, we are in the middle of August recess. So we really want to highlight how you can use this recess to strengthen your relationships with elected officials. With members of Congress back at home, it's the perfect opportunity for community college leaders to strengthen their relationships and advocate for their students and institutions. That could be by, inviting your member of Congress to your campus, allowing them to or offering them to use your institution as a place for them to host whether like different kinds of events. It could be a town hall, it could be, maybe they come and table at your campus so that you can, they can table at your campus like to help their constituents or a number of other things. Or you guys could also like co-host an event, or you can invite them to any events that you are having on your campus. But making sure that you're engaging with them and strengthening those relationships is crucial. And we recently published an article on our blog, ACCT Now, that best explains why it's the best time to form these relationships and strengthen them, and also provides extensive resources. For example, we have a toolkit to guide you, the membership, on how to reach out to these offices and who to reach out to as well. We have a section where you can look up who your elected officials are. We also provide prep for the meeting and just step-by-step on how to best prep and what materials you should have, etc. And then we have resources on our top legislative priorities. So those that are familiar with ACCT, you guys will know that we have our annual green sheet with our top legislative priorities for the year. And then we have our brochure that has just our entire legislative agenda. So those links are available there as well. And then also just general best practices for how to follow up afterwards, whether it's releasing releasing a statement to the press, or it could be like following up, writing an article, thanking the member, things like that. So definitely want to make sure you guys have all the resources at your disposal to best engage with your elected officials. And we also are gonna, when we send out the slides, we'll add this link, but we're trying to keep track of how you guys are engaging locally, because then that informs us and how you guys are best engaging and how you guys are strengthening your relationships. So we do have a form that we're asking all of our members to fill out on if they engage with their members, just to give us a bit more insight back here in DC. So we'll also provide that information once we send out the slides. And then I think we're going to just close up with some upcoming events. Next week, Wednesday, August 17th at 3 p.m., we're going to have a Protecting the Mental Health of Rural Community College Students webinar, and that's going to be hosted through ACCT as well. We are right now doing we have a grant helping rural institutions. And so this is part of that series where we have one webinar per month addressing different issues that rural community colleges are facing. And then also, as most of you probably know, ACCT is having their Leadership Congress this year in New York, and the dates are October 26th through the 29th. So we encourage you guys to register to our conference. And I just want to remind you all that the early bird deadline to register is August 19th. And if you need more information on how to register, you can visit congress.acct.org. And now we're going to enter a Q&A period. I know I've seen a couple questions coming up through the chat, but also feel free to unmute yourselves or ask through the chat.
And we'll start off with an easy logistical one. So we're asked when and how the slides will be available. So we'll have the slides available up next week on our website. We just have to make sure the video gets processed and we can upload it, and then we'll upload the video along with the slide deck. So check our website next week. But in addition to that, and this is a great opportunity for me to pitch this, we will include, once the recording and the slide deck is up on the website, we will include this in our weekly latest action in Washington alerts. So if you're not already receiving our law alerts, we usually send those about once a week, unless there are multiple things happening in the week that require attention. We usually send those on Wednesday. So if you're not already receiving those, please reach out to us so we can sign you up. And this is going to be another way for you to get a heads up and a reminder that this recording and the slide deck is available and posted online. We had one more question, which I'm going to turn over to Rosario, and it was on the Inflation Reduction Act. It says, could you explain more about how community colleges could be involved in the 3 grant programs under the Inflation Reduction Act?
Yes, so under the eligibility requirements for those grants on who can apply to the grants to receive them, it states institutions of higher education generally as participants that would be eligible to apply. So once the bill is finalized and signed into law, then the departments are going to have to, put together the grants and send them out and have an open period, usually 60 days for people or institutions to apply. So that's basically how we'll need to do that. We can provide follow-up information once those go live and they start accepting applicants. But right now we don't have all the information just because the bill hasn't passed yet. And those programs need to kind of be ironed out since they're going to be brand new programs. But community colleges will be able to apply just like most other grants that we're eligible for. Jose, did you want to add anything there?
No, just thank you, Rosario, for that. And then we had my final question come in, and feel free to keep asking many more questions if any more come up. But someone asked, what should we be talking about with our representatives if we meet with them this month? That's a great question. Even though Congress just finished a very, very hectic period of legislative activity with the Chips and Science Act and with the Inflation Reduction Act. There are still a lot of pending items, appropriations being the primary one, of course, but also we recognize that a lot of our key priorities did not make it into the Chips and Science Act. So this is a great opportunity to, one, remind them of the impact and importance of federal investment in higher education. If you have them tour your campus or come visit, and push for those key items that are priorities for your college so that they make it into the FY23 funding bill. But it's also a great way to remind them that, hey, short-term Pell is important to us. We would love to have students access Pell Grants if they want to do a short-term workforce training program, because we know they can reap the benefits off of that, and that's a financial barrier to them. So it's always good to remind them that this is still pending, and I know you all just tried doing it, but it didn't work out, but this is still very important to us. So those are just some items that you can mention during your meetings. Of course, thanking them for anything that they've done for you. If you were able to receive congressionally directed spending or community funding projects in FY22, or if your project made the list in the FY23 tentatively, which, you know, that funding will not be available until that bill passes and becomes law. But if your project made it into the initial list, at least, then you're on the right track. So those are some items that you can talk to them about.
I would also add, with the HERF funding, it could also be a good time to just show them where the money that they've already invested is going and what else can use improvements. So I think that'll be good to thank them for that HERF money and show them how impactful it is on your campuses, so they can see it. You know, you can always hear about like, oh, this money is going to this or that, but for them to be able to see it toward the campus possibly, and get a firsthand account, that definitely would help, just generally increasing funding to community colleges.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions on the Q&A section, so we're gonna go ahead and close out the webinar. I put our last slide up on the screen for you all in case you have any questions after the fact, or there's a question you didn't want to ask here, but you would like to ask us privately. Feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is there. You can reach out to any of us. And of course, you can always use the public policy at acct.org email, and that way you'll reach all of us because we're all checking it. Thank you once again, and we look forward to seeing some of you at Congress in New York in October. Have a great weekend and have a great August.